sat up in bed trembling. His skin was cold and damp. His heart was beating as though he had been running. He looked at his watch. It was 10 minutes after 6. In the pale light which filtered through the curtains and shimmered from a corner of the picture mirror, he could read the familiar contours of his wife's figure in the adjoining bed. She was asleep. Then he looked for the dresser, the nightstand, the chair across which he had thrown his slacks. All were in their accustomed places. What had awakened him? He inventoried his body. He didn't have a headache. His stomach wasn't upset. He wasn't thirsty. Furthermore, he had no recollection of dreaming. And yet this was the 3rd time he had been awakened. He lay back on the pillow and tried to recall the activities of the previous evening. They had gone to the movies, though he could barely recollect the picture, nor what they had talked about afterward. He remembered they had walked back to the hotel, stopping for ice cream, and then at the newsstand in the hotel lobby for the morning newspaper. And suddenly he saw himself running across the red and gold carpeting in the hotel lobby, and that incredible meeting with Howie began to retrace itself in his consciousness. There was Howie waving the packets of bills in the air. 82, 4, or was it $86,000? Urging him to take $4,000 or more, if he needed or even wanted it. What had he called them? His green men, his strong green men. And then he saw himself running across the lobby again toward the newsstand, and the entire episode repeating itself in an endless loop of personal examination and criticism. Why had he run away? Why was he afraid he might not be able to resist Howie's offer? If Howie's story was true, then it was his own money which Howie was offering him, and it was not easy to refuse the return of his own money. Then, too, there was his awareness of needing to put aside more money for his children's education. And finally, the money could be difficult to refuse because he knew Howie could easily afford to give it to him. And yet, he had not forgotten that it was all tainted money. It was gambling money years ago when he had given it to Howie, and it was gambling money yesterday when Howie wanted to give it back. And so he had protected himself and his loyalty to his family and the fellowship by running away. But he recognized the irony that in attempting to escape from repeating the selfishness of his gambling life, he had acted just as selfishly. He had dishonored the memory of an old friendship, had acted like a coward, and had denied Howie the opportunity to make restitution. He had been totally preoccupied with what was good and bad for himself, without any thought about what was good or bad for Howie, or even for his children, who would be ecstatic, he knew, to see their old friend. He threw off the blanket, jumped out of bed, dressed hurriedly, careful not to awaken his wife, left a note on the dresser, and took the elevator to the main floor. It was 7:30, but some people were already gathered at the checkout desk, and a few at the entrance to the casino. Nevertheless, the first sounds he heard were the hum of floor polishers and vacuum cleaners as the maintenance crews finished their work. The smell of tile wax, brass polish, and carpet cleaner stimulated his appetite, but he knew that, until he had apologized to Howie, he would not stop for breakfast. Abner remembered that Howie had complained that he had not slept for 3 days and nights during the marathon poker game. Surely he must be sleeping now. But where did he sleep? Where did he live? Most likely some of the local hustlers would know, he told himself, and walked toward the casino. The entrance was a large doorless archway edged with a band of blood-red neon tubing. It gave the archway the appearance, at least to Abner, of a huge open mouth, and he approached it cautiously, obliquely, from the side, as if he might be pulled in. When he heard the card calls, the clink of chips and the clacking of the roulette wheels, his chest tightened, making it difficult for him to breathe. The sounds reminded him of a panther crunching on the bones of the gamblers, and he shivered, gulped at the air, and moved farther to the side, feeling the exhilarating fear he imagined he would experience in the immediate presence of that rapacious carnivore. The light darkened when, from his perspective, someone crossed in front of the entrance, and Abner flinched, as though that giant mouth had snapped shut on another victim. At this early hour, There was no one in front of him waiting in line to enter the casino, and he could have moved closer to the entrance. Nevertheless, he had determined that he was as close as he dared allow himself. There was no legal or moral prohibition keeping him from entering the casino, but he knew there was the danger that if he did go inside, he might succumb to the psychological stimuli and persuasive atmosphere of the casino and begin to gamble. He knew that those who were unimpressed with the emotional obsessiveness of compulsive gambling might consider his fear of entering the casino proof that he was a fool. But as they got closer, he noticed that they looked like hotel guests and were not likely to know Howie. They were overdressed for all-night gambling, their business suits were creased from long hours of sitting, their vests were unbuttoned, and they had loosened their collars and ties. As they approached the exit, they seemed to walk closer together, almost touching arms as if they needed mutual support, and yet they did not speak to or even look at each other. They walked with a shuffling gait, too exhausted to lift their feet or their eyes from the carpeting. Abner looked into their gray, expressionless faces and felt embarrassed as though he had invaded their privacy, for he knew and understood the pain they were trying to hide. "Four losers," he said to himself with sympathy and looked away as they passed him. Then two men wearing cowboy hats came out. By their raucous laughter, it was obvious to Abner that they were winners. They stopped to listen to his question, but they were from El Paso and had never heard of Howie. It became apparent to him that if anyone knew Howie, it probably would be someone from the hotel staff, and he waited until a cigarette girl and then two security guards walked by, but none knew Howie. Finally, he stopped a waiter who came out holding a serving tray under his arm, as if it were a battle shield. He was from room service, the waiter responded to Abner's questions, and although he had just carried a light breakfast for several of the all-night gamblers, he had no idea or recollection of how many guests were in the casino. But perhaps he had served breakfast to the players in the marathon poker game that had ended upstairs yesterday afternoon, Abner prompted. "Maybe you know my friend Howie Packer. Little fella, wears a checkered cap and smokes dry cigars." The waiter looked at him dourly and mumbled that his job was to pay attention to the food and the check. "My friend was the big winner yesterday. I'm trying to find somebody who knows where he lives," he explained and repeated the description. "If he was a winner yesterday, he'll be back today. That's the way it is with all of them dummies. They can't stay away until they're flat broke. I just served breakfast to a couple of high rollers from New York, but I couldn't tell you what they looked like. All I know is if they would have had to pay cash for their food, they'd have had to go hungry. But they just charged it to their room bill. They better have their return tickets or they might have to swim home. I've seen their kind before. What did you say his name was?" "Howie Packer. Sometimes he calls himself Howie Parker or Harvey Pasteur when he wants to dress it up." The waiter pointed to the reception desk. "Did you ask them?" "Oh, he's not a hotel guest. Why don't you go in and see if you can find him? It's not a private club. Otherwise, try the Melbourne room around 4 this afternoon. That's when they start playing again." The waiter picked up his tray. Although Abner had no intention of entering the casino, he also was determined not to wait until the afternoon. That would be too late, he told himself, and he looked around, desperately seeking an answer. Before he was aware of her, she was standing in front of him, blocking his view into the casino, smiling provocatively, almost carelessly, her bosom full, temptingly exposed. The shock of her smile pleased him. He had forgotten, but of course he recognized, that she was a hostess and smiled at every patron. Nevertheless, he heard himself ask apologetically if she knew a card player by the name of Howie Packer. Sometimes he calls himself Howie Parker, or Pasteur, little man with big teeth, almost like a horse. Wears checkered caps, smokes little. "Why not come in and play a few games while you wait for your friend?" she interrupted. "There's a table over there that's ready for a winner." No, thank you. I'm just looking for my friend. Maybe he comes in here to play craps or blackjack." A roar of approval and applause from a table directly opposite to the entranceway attracted his attention, and he watched a winner embrace and then shake hands with the patrons who surrounded him. Abner remembered that feeling of victory, confidence and power. He saw himself in the person of that blackjack player, watched him pocket his winnings, and realized it always had been the challenge of winning that consumed him. The challenge of putting his ingenuity, his tenacity and courage, his intelligence, against the odds and against the skill of others. That was always what had excited him. The money had always been second to the challenge. Even though he was standing outside the casino, Abner suddenly felt a rush of passion to gamble, which was so physical, it made him nauseous. It was, for an instant, as powerful as any sexual urge he had ever known. In that moment, he recalled all the sensations of winning against the biggest odds, and of being so high on the excitement of beating any challenge that he was gasping for breath. He was startled at the momentary intensity of his desire to gamble, but not by the idea of gambling, for he had long ago accepted the fact that, like a man with a malfunctioning kidney who requires blood dialysis, he needed a kind of emotional dialysis in order to purge himself of what was a weak but still existent attraction to the competition of gambling. "This is crazy," he told himself, and instinctively moved backward from the entrance a few steps. "I am not going inside. I'm only looking for Howie." But even as he undertook to control himself, he was aware of thinking about the satisfaction of pyramiding a small bet into a pile of chips, a bundle of cash as big as Howie's. He had always been a better gambler than Howie. And of staying awake for 3 or 4 days and nights just like Howie, in order to play out the game until he showed them all how it was done. The blackjack winner was leaving the table, and Abner studied the width of his shoulders and wondered if he could juggle 6 cans of tomatoes, or 8 softballs, or walk across a metal-spiked fence in his sneakers without falling off. Floating through his memories came the high-pitched, defiant cry of kids. "I'll bet you can't hit it over the Great Bear sign. What do you want to bet? I dare you to walk over that ledge. I'll bet you won't dive in there. Your buck against my 5, you can't make 8 baskets in a row from here. I'll put up my 2 best baseball cards, you can't juggle." Some people were lucky. They could accept any challenge and yet remain unaffected even if they lost. Their self-esteem was never damaged by losing, and they did not become egotistical as a result of winning. Less fortunate were the poor losers, the complainers, the brooders, and the apologists who rationalized excuses for losing. But by far the least fortunate were the few, like Abner, who were driven to succeed, to practice secretly, even at night if necessary, until they could defeat any challenger in any game. Yet theirs was as much the futility and frustration as the determination of champions, because they could not win all the time. No one could. However, they did not complain or whimper when they lost, but drove themselves more relentlessly to win. Abner had been such a boy. He had never known, or at least acknowledged his limits, and had kept pushing himself to excel. And it had led to his taking chances, testing his self-confidence and determination, gambling not for money at first, but on his ability to be the best, until the success of gambling on anything, and eventually to his discovery at the age of 36 that he was still a little boy. But Abner would never know if he could beat that blackjack player at any game, for all of his questions were unspoken, and all of his challenges were silent, muted by the recognition of something he had known, but until this moment had not had to admit. The exhilarating freedom and fun of childhood were gone forever. He had finally, and sadly, grown up. He turned and walked from the casino entrance past the front desk, the cashier's office, and a bulletin board which listed the activities and meetings for the day. Unable to decide what next to do, he scanned the messages fast as he could read them, skipping across the lines as though he truly expected to find Howie's address. "Welcome. American Drug Plenary Session. 9:45 a.m. 20th Annis Reunion. Offie Crew USS Deviso. Flores Suite. Wilson Room. Chrysanth. Tours. Luncheon. District Manage. Telephone Compa. Telephone." Perhaps Howie had a phone. He began to run toward the phone booths and the telephone directories. If Howie had a phone, his address would be listed, though by which of his names he might be listed he had no idea. He was halfway to the booths when he noticed 2 feet in yellow and orange striped socks, resting on a chair, which stuck out from behind a hedge of artificial privet. The socks were so ugly he was certain they could belong to only one person, and with mounting expectation, he walked around the hedge. There was Howie. He was asleep on a couch, his legs and stockinged feet resting on an adjoining chair, his curled shoes and checkered cap placed neatly under the chair. It was obvious that he had not gone home. He was wearing the same clothes, even the same green tie, only it was uglier and more spotted than it had looked yesterday. "Howie?" Abner shook his arm and watched as he yawned, wiped his eyes and stared up at him as though still asleep. "What are you doing here? How come you didn't go home?" "I meant to, but I got tired and took a nap. What time is it?" 8:15. I want to talk with you." Howie swung his feet onto the carpeting and sat up. "What do you want to talk about?" He pulled at the toes of his socks, but made no effort to put on his shoes. "About yesterday." Abner was still uncertain what he was going to say other than to apologize, but he knew there was something else. "I woke up this morning and realized that I didn't treat you right. There was no good reason why I should have run away from you. I suppose I was concerned with protecting myself." Howie rubbed his eyes with his wrists and yawned again. Nah. That's all right, Neddie. You were surprised to see me." Abner glanced around the lobby. He need not have feared being overheard. The lobby was almost empty, particularly when compared to the crowd with which it had been filled the previous night. "But it was selfish of me, and I apologize." "Forget it, Neddie. I understand." Howie smacked his lips and rubbed his stomach. "I think I'm hungry. You can have breakfast with us. I'm going to meet Phyllis and the kids here in the lobby in a little while." Howie jumped up and patted his hair. "But I ain't cleaned up, Neddie. I couldn't let them see me." He pulled the brim of his cap over his eyebrows, sat down and hunched over, to make himself less noticeable. "He could wash in their suite," Abner suggested. "I'll take you up after Phyllis leaves. You can wear one of my shirts." Howie shook his head and smacked his lips in anticipation. He stomped his feet with a kind of rhythmic glee. But his gratitude for what was a small generosity embarrassed Abner, and he urged him to gather up his clothes. While Howie struggled to put his feet into his warped shoes and tie the laces, Abner went to the house phones and called his wife. She was already dressed and waiting for his call. Abner asked her to cancel their golf and tennis lessons and to take the children to the coffee shop for breakfast. "Start without me. I'll be a little late. I have a surprise for you," he added mysteriously, wanting to keep his wife from asking questions or waiting for him in their suite. When he returned, he found Howie pacing in front of the couch on which he had slept, already smoking one of his peeling cigars, and absorbed in such concentration that he did not notice him. "Are you ready?" Howie flinched and then, like a baseball pitcher going through his wind-up, proceeded with the motions of his cigar-smoking ritual. He was ready, but first he wanted to ask a question, and he closed his eyelids until they were almost touching, as if he believed he could magnify his sight by limiting his field of vision. Abner knew this grimace. It almost always anticipated a question to which Howie attributed an important answer. "How much money have you made gambling since the last time we saw each other?" It was such an unexpectedly naive question, Abner refused to treat it seriously. "Let me think a moment." He paused, pretending to be calculating. "It was 11.5 or maybe 12 million before I quit. I got tired of paying so much taxes on my winnings." "Oh, come on, Neddie. It must be a pile if you won't say how much it is. You can tell me." He sucked in the saliva glistening at the corners of his lips. In what manner could he or anyone else report the truth to Howie and assume he understood it? Howie's brain seemed to respond to different currents of stimuli, for he heard, saw, and believed only in that which, from his total experience, agreed with his preconceived faith in the goodness of nature, the reasonableness of chance, and the reliability of people. Abner wondered if any man could be more romantic and foolish. The truth was that he had not won so much as a fat quarter in almost 5 years, he reported. Well then, how much have you lost? You must have hit the worst plague of bad luck ever. What's the most you've lost at one time? His lips curled away from his teeth as though he had bitten into a sour plum. But he seemed equally excited by the mention of any large sum of money, regardless of whether it had been won or lost. Big money interest you, huh? Well, I'd consider it big money if I bet $5 and won, and even bigger money if I bet $5 and lost. That's hard cheese to swallow, Neddie. I remember you betting, Mo. Told you I haven't gambled for years, he interrupted. Not for money, buttons, matchsticks, or my school lunch. I have a good job. I work hard at it, and my salary doesn't depend on figuring odds and covering long shots. I don't gamble anymore. Understand? He challenged, then looked at his watch. It was time to go, and he pointed to the elevators. But Howie pulled back, complaining he did not want to use the front elevators for fear of meeting Abner's family. You don't look strong enough to walk up 16 flights. They could use the service elevators, Howie suggested, and led him around the clusters of people beginning to fill the lobby, through a gilded door to the pantry, and along a corridor whose chipped and marred walls were partially hidden by stacks of folding chairs, lecterns, carts, flagpoles, and tabletops for banquets in the grand ballroom, stored on edge-like lids for enormous cans. As he followed Howie, the level of noise began to rise in the passageway, becoming louder and more discordant until, at a turn in the corridor, they came upon the loading area for the freight elevators. The entire hall was filled with room service waiters standing in line with red and white covered serving carts, watching for the lights that signaled the arrival of the elevators. It was, to Abner, like visiting backstage during the performance of an opera. The waiters, dressed as resplendent members of the soldier chorus in starched linen jackets with gold buttons and epaulets, adjusted their bow ties, smoothed their hair, and fidgeted with their carts as they paraded from the kitchen to the loading area, and then onto the brightly lit elevators. Although there was no hotel policy of which Abner knew forbidding them from riding on the freight elevators with hotel employees, and even though he was a registered guest of the hotel, Abner felt uncomfortable, as if he and Howie might disarrange or soil the spotless carts or uniforms of the waiters, merely by brushing against them. Found your friend? Abner turned toward the voice and recognized the waiter he had stopped in the lobby. Yes? He nodded and patted Howie's shoulder. I thought you worked in the casino. This was the worst time of the day for them, the waiter grumbled. Most of the hotel guests ate their lunch and dinner in restaurants, but it seemed to him as if they all wanted to have breakfast in their rooms. The waiter stared at Howie and shook his head, as if in disbelief. You? The one who knocked down the house yesterday? He glanced at Howie's disheveled appearance. Looks like you smacked it just in time. He nodded to Abner and pushed his cart onto the pantry hall at the next floor. Busboys, waiters, and chambermaids squeezed on and off the elevator at various stops. Carts were maneuvered artfully and trays held overhead until the elevator reached the 16th floor, where Abner and Howie pressed their way to the front and got off. Abner knocked at the door to their suite, and when there was no answer, he turned the key and motioned for Howie to enter. This is some room, Neddie. It's like a suite. You got a separate bedroom. Cost you a couple of horseshoes, eh? Howie sat down and suddenly began to breathe heavily through his mouth, as though he were hyperventilating. Do you feel all right? Abner asked, and pointed to the complimentary carafe of orange juice provided by the hotel every morning. Want some of this? Howie nodded and held a glass in both hands while Abner poured, then gulped down the orange juice. Instantly, even while Abner turned to put the carafe back on the tray, Howie groaned, dropped the glass on the floor, and clutched at his stomach. Cramps, he gasped, making whistling noises in his nose and holding his sides as though he were in labor. Abner helped him into the bathroom and made him sip warm water until he had recovered. Then he turned on the faucets in the tub. Take a bath and shave. Use my razor and soap. It's all here. Meantime, I'll get the valet to spot clean and press your suit. I'm sorry, Neddie. I forgot I didn't eat yesterday or the day before that. I was too excited with the game." He closed the bathroom door, picked up the phone, requested the valet, and then on impulse asked for room service. Howie needed nourishment. Then he walked to the bedroom, took out a clean shirt, shorts, and a pair of socks from the dresser, picked a tie from the closet and carried the clothing into the living room and placed them on the table next to the couch. "Empty your pockets in my bathrobe and give me your suit," he hollered through the door. By the time Howie came out of the bathroom in Abner's robe, looking thinner, smaller, older, and more fragile, the valet had taken away his rumpled suit and run-down shoes, and the room service waiter had knocked on the door. Howie glanced at the serving card appreciatively. "That's beautiful." He sat down and lifted the food warmers. "Ham and eggs, home fries. Say, this is some breakfast, Neddie. How much did it cost you? I want to pay." "Eat. Don't worry about the cost. You're my guest." Howie buttered a slice of toast and squashed it into the eggs and then put down his fork. "You said I could have breakfast with you and Phyllis and the kids. Why'd you say that if you didn't mean it?" He stared at the plate of food but kept his hands in his lap. "Nothing had changed," Abner explained. "This breakfast was just something to fortify him until they went downstairs to see his family. I ordered it because you said you hadn't eaten for a couple of days." Howie picked up his fork, glanced at him for confirmation that he had meant what he had said, and then began to eat, making little grunts of pleasure as he swallowed each bite of food. "Many thanks, Neddie. Many thanks. You're a true friend, a real pal. This is a repast fit for the King of Sardinia, but where's your plate?" He did not want to eat now, he explained, holding out his cup while Howie poured from the coffee pot. There would be time enough later in the morning when he could have breakfast since he had canceled the family's golf and tennis lessons for the day. "You can visit with the kids, and then we'll all go on a picnic. Just like the old days," he almost added, but thought better of it. Howie's teeth almost burst out of his mouth as he giggled. He did a little dance on the table with his fingers. "Oh, Neddie, I knew you didn't mean it yesterday, and now you've canceled your lessons. I always knew you were my friend. Won't it cost you a lot?" No, Abner interrupted, but trying to hide his impatience. It was all to be a surprise for Phyllis and the children. He hadn't told them about meeting him last night. "What a real pal you are, Neddie. I owe you an apology for yesterday, for running away. That's why I came looking for you this morning. I was afraid of all that money you won, and maybe I was a little envious of you. I admit I never won that much in any game. Then you embarrassed me by offering to give me $4,000 for a dumb thing I had done years ago and forgot about. But, of course, you never forgot. I just wanted to pay back what I owed you, Neddie. Don't you understand how I felt? I didn't think I deserved that money just because you claimed you owed it to me after 5 years. And I wasn't going to take that money simply because you could afford it. Besides, you had already told me you had won at gambling. What's happening to you, Neddie? You're talking to me like I was your mama's preacher. Of course it's gambling money, won and lost, over and over again. And that's why you won't have any of it left in a month." Howie did not answer immediately. He appeared to be contemplating something which made him feel uncomfortable and caused his lips to quiver. "What would you do with them, Neddie, if you were me?" "With what?" "My strong green men. I'd sign them to a long-term contract before they could desert and take a job with somebody else. I'd bank the whole bundle." "I can't do that," Abner sighed. "How much do you owe?" "I don't owe much to anybody except you and 5.5 weeks back rent to the YMCA. I got a pawn shop ticket for my watch and a couple suitcases of clothes. Pay the Y and get your clothes out. Don't worry about what you owe me. You can pay me whatever amount you want, whatever satisfies you, whatever makes you feel good." Abner sipped at his coffee. "But I got a right to feel good too. So, whatever you give me, I'm going to give to charity." Howie slid out from the table, turned and supported himself by holding onto the arms of the chair in which he had been sitting. He twisted his head and looked at him sideways. "Would you feel just as good if I gave you only part of the money? So long as that's what you want to do." It'd make me feel better to give it all to you, Neddie, but I haven't got it all. Abner gave a nervous laugh. I suppose you put it in the stock market? Nah. I mean, I lost some of it last night. Your bundle, your money? Abner dropped his cup onto the saucer, splashing the coffee on his hand. You got rolled, mugged. Oh, I'm too smart for that. Lost it, flim-flammed, dipped? He rose from his chair. I told you not to flash those bills. Nah, don't worry. It isn't serious, Neddie. I went to the casino after you left me. What's, The pronoun left his mouth in a squishing sound like air escaping from a balloon. You went in there? He sat down. I thought if I'd win some more green men, you wouldn't feel so bad about letting me pay you back. Besides, I enjoy playing roulette. I like the sound of the wheel and the little ball. Abner jumped up. You couldn't wait until today? Why didn't you call me? I was afraid Phyllis or the kids would answer, and I didn't think you wanted me to talk to them. I known you a long time, and you never needed an excuse to make a bet. You know you would have gone to the casino no matter what I said, or whether you had $500,000 or $100,000. It was easy to rebuke Howie for losing money in the casino. Abner had admonished himself so often for chasing his gambling losses. It was as though, while looking at Howie, he was actually talking to himself. Just as it had never been sufficient for him to know simply that he lost, he always had to know to the penny how much he lost and why he had lost. So it was that almost reflexively, he asked Howie how much he had lost in the casino, and if he knew why he had lost it. Maybe I lost more than I wanted to, Howie confided and gulped from his coffee cup. That's an answer. I'll bet you counted it 5 times. Put it on the table and count it again. He didn't have any of the money with him. He'd put it in the hotel safe before he took his nap. Howie, you never lied to me. Except maybe just that once. But you're avoiding my question. How much did you lose? I got 75. You lost $10,000 in the casino last night? Abner asked quietly, trying to avoid the panic he was beginning to feel. Yesterday I wouldn't have cared if you had lost it all. Now it hurts me almost as much as it does you. Oh, it's only money, Neddie. I can win it back. And you could lose another 20,000 trying to get back the first 10. Howie got up suddenly and went into the bathroom. Abner heard him turn on the water faucet in the wash basin, and he waited until he came out wiping his face with a towel. He looked ill, Abner judged, but he had less sympathy for Howie since hearing of his childlike unconcern for the money he had lost. Besides, in a convoluted way, he was angry with Howie for causing him to be angry with himself. Abner believed he was partially to blame for what had happened to Howie. He knew he never should have left him alone with $85,000 in cash in his pockets. That was like leaving a child alone to play with matches. But Abner also reminded himself that he had no responsibility for the way in which Howie had won his money, and he could not accept responsibility for the manner in which he had lost any of it. His responsibility was to himself and the continuing struggle for his own recovery. If he had felt a need to keep away from the temptation of Howie's money, if he had felt some danger in succumbing to the nostalgia of his old gambling life, even though such dangers or temptations were only in his imagination, then he had done what was necessary for his self-protection, just as he had known to stay out of the casino. Nevertheless, the conscience of the fellowship was so persistent in reminding him of Howie's desperate inability to manage money that Abner finally volunteered to help him. I'll tell you what we'll do, he suggested. When we go downstairs, we'll take your cash out of the hotel safe and walk it around the block to a bank. That way, we'll keep your green men from setting fire to your pockets every time you pass the casino. Howie poured the last of the coffee into his cup, and although it was less than half full, he added several spoonfuls of sugar, stirred the spoon with a nervous twisting of his wrist, and drank noisily. I got to tell you something, Neddie. He held the coffee cup in both hands close to his face, the way he often held his cigar, almost hiding his mouth. You didn't understand what I said before. He set down the cup and wiped his mouth with the sleeve of the bathrobe, but he did not speak. Instead, He picked up his fork and touched the crumbs of food on his empty breakfast dishes. "All right, tell me what I misunderstood," Abner urged, unable to continue watching Howie's irritating behavior. "It's like I said, Neddie. You misunderstood me. I got 7,500 left, not 75,000. Even in the limited time Abner had had in which to become reacquainted with Howie, he had been reminded that Howie's peculiar mannerisms almost always indicated his mood and what he was thinking. But nothing in Howie's behavior prepared Abner for the shock of what he heard him say, and he tried to act as if he had not understood him. And that was a mistake, because Howie repeated it. Abner wanted to throw up. He felt such frustration and rage that he accidentally knocked an ashtray off the nightstand as he flailed his arms. His eyes filled with tears. He felt the perspiration run down his back, sticking his shirt to his skin, and to hide his hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. He crossed his arms over his chest and shoved his hands under his armpits. Of course it was the money that mattered, even though it wasn't his. But there was something else that angered him, which always angered him when he lost at cards or at the track or at trying to hit a ball over the Great Bear sign. He knew he could do it. He'd done it. And yet so many times when it counted, when he was competing against himself and the world, he had failed. It was failing that angered him. It was being defeated that frustrated him, even Howie's defeat, of losing and not knowing or understanding why, of not being able to comprehend the logic of losing, only to know that all the planning, rehearsing, practice, and control stood for nothing. It meant giving in, capitulating to a force stronger and more impersonal than he was, than Howie was, or than either of them could ever be. That made Abner angry. He looked at Howie and saw that he was trying to appear nonchalant, although he was obviously surprised at the merciless speed with which he had lost so much, and like a boy whose kite suddenly snaps the string and sails off with the wind, Howie kept looking up at the ceiling as if he were searching there for an answer, while his fingers kept touching the tassels at the ends of the belt, which was part of Abner's bathrobe. "You dropped $80,000 like that?" But Howie could only shrug his shoulders in a kind of hopeless dismay and mumble that everybody couldn't be lucky every day. "I ask you, how could you lose $80,000 in a few hours in the casino? And you tell me, everybody can't be lucky every day. Do you have any idea what $80,000 would buy? Do you know how hard most people work without ever saving $80,000? He was shivering. "Why are you so upset, Neddie? It's my money. Or at least it was. I'm not angry with anyone, not even with myself. I care because we've been friends for a long time, and maybe because I think I'm responsible for you. I care because it was obvious to me from your appearance that you didn't have any money before you won that marathon poker game. I care when you use me as an excuse for hurting yourself. Now I understand why you slept in the lobby. I'm sorry if I disappointed you, Neddie. I never wanted you to know. It came out unexpected. I'll give you $3,500 now and send you $500 next month. Is that all right? That's part of your trouble. You don't have a place to sleep. You lose $80,000 and you're planning to pay me back $4,000. It's only right. I owe you. Howie, you're 2 years older than I am, and what have you got to show for all these years of gambling? No bank account. No business, no home, no job. Oh, but you're wrong there, Neddie. I got a job. He smiled proudly and pulled the bathrobe tight across his thin chest. I'm the night manager of Pete's Pita Burgers. What? I'm not a very good night manager. Pete says I give away too much food to the drifters who come into the place. He says I'm too poor to be so extravagant, but he trusts me with the cash register. I guess that's why he lets me stay. But I haven't been there for 4 nights, so maybe he fired me. Then it's like I said, no job, no car, no wife, no nothing. Where'd it all go, Howie? I suppose it goes into the game so that we can win it back again. You think you're gonna win $85,000 again playing cards? How many times have you done that? Only this once, Neddie, but I won some big pots in other games. And I'm a good horse player. If I don't think I can win, I don't bet. Going to tell you something I might not have said to you yesterday. You're a compulsive gambler, Howie. You're like me. I'm a compulsive gambler. And you've got to do what I did. I can't say it was easy. Maybe that's what challenged me. It was the most difficult thing I ever did in my life. But you've got to quit gambling. Quit? What would I do? I don't know anything but hustling. And you don't know anything about winning. Can't you understand that for people like us, winning is always a loan? It's temporary. Only losing is permanent. Gambling never scared you, Neddie. The hell it didn't, Abner shouted. I wasn't smarter than you, or even luckier. I just had one thing you don't have. A successful brother. But, Neddie, you always had good wheels and expensive clothes. You know how to live, like this hotel suite and this shirt and tie. I never had such a shirt like this. I've been proud you were my friend. And I always knew I could count on you, just the way you came through for me today. I tell everybody about you and Phyllis and the kids and Danny. It makes me feel good, sort of like being part of a family. I wish I could be like you, or make you proud of me, like I am of you. And Danny. Abner could barely breathe. He walked to the air conditioning unit, turned up the thermostat, and with his back to Howie closed his eyes and inhaled. He had said the same kind of words to his brother, and he knew how self-destructive they had been. Don't say that to me, you hear? Or to anyone. You don't want to be like me or anybody else. I spent 20 years trying to please my brother, trying to catch up with him, trying to impress him, and then, after he died, he wanted to add, but managed not to say it. I learned it wasn't necessary. He loved me even when he found out I had lied to him, even when he knew I was immature and selfish. You, Neddie? What are you saying? You were never selfish. You were always honest with everybody and fair. If you talk about my past, you must be more accurate, Abner warned him. I'm not trying to be pretty, just honest with myself. I was never more than a fool with too much money, and I don't want credit for having been anything else. But you done nice things for lots of people, particularly for me. Just like this breakfast and this shirt and tie, and the socks you're loaning me. Say, this is just like the old days. You'd win at poker, and I'd win at the track or at craps, and then we'd— Nonsense, Abner interrupted irritably. You think I was a good gambler, a winner. I never won more than enough to cover my losses. Toward the end, I was losing all the time. You know why? Because I don't know how to gamble. I never did. I couldn't make a few bucks and quit, and I couldn't lose a few bucks and quit. I don't know how to quit. And you don't either. And when you don't know how to quit, you don't know how to win. I quit the poker game yesterday at 5 o'clock, just like I said I would. You didn't quit. You just interrupted your gambling for a few hours. And that's all I ever did day by day, for more than 31 years. Why was he talking like that? Howie asked him, squirming in his chair. Because it's time you see me for what I am. Or was, and yourself too. I was no success, he admitted. I want you all to know I was dishonest with money and unrealistic about my life. I spent a lot of time lying and cheating to make up for having lost so many jobs, so many friends, so much money. While even before he finished speaking, Abner recognized in the sounds and rhythm of his words a familiar syntax, and he realized he had indeliberately repeated a sentence verbatim from the catechism of his therapy, just as he had spoken it at 1,000 group meetings. At those meetings, he would wait his turn to recite with uncompromising accuracy the autobiography of his sickness, and then listen to the all too familiar stories of others. These were not confessions, however, but the principal means by which the members of his fellowship kept in touch with the reality of their past. Such revelations were not given as exercises in self-punishment, but as exercises in self-awareness, not so much as expressions of their guilt for the past, but as the starkest reminder of their mutual and unending vulnerability. Could his self-deprecating therapy shock Howie from his nostalgic romanticism with the past? It would depend upon his ability to disturb Howie by repeating the same squalid and degrading autobiography he gave in his therapy. revealing incidents in his life he had rationalized or hidden for so many years that even Howie was not aware of them. Yet he also debated whether or not it was right for him to interfere with Howie's childlike faith in a just world or with his compulsive need to gamble. Howie hadn't asked for his help and seemed to be happy enough, or at least content with himself and the world he had constructed. Abner knew that to try to change whatever gave meaning and continuity and satisfaction to Howie's life was a dangerous and selfish thing to do. If Howie were forced to abandon his faith in an understandable and just world, even though he had naively self-constructed it from the exaggerated idealism of his own personality, he might become ill if he destroyed that which Howie needed in order to hold together the fortunes and misfortunes of his life in reasonable equilibrium. Abner would have to offer him an adequate emotional substitute. But just as it was useless to offer honor to cynics, so Abner realized it was useless to present the truth to the naive. Nevertheless, Abner was uncertain whether he came to an unconscious decision to give his therapy to Howie and then began to recite it, or whether he first began to recite his therapy and then concluded it was the right thing to do. All he was able to recognize was that, after the second sentence of his therapy, my gambling problems began when I was 11 years old. He stopped and was unable to continue. He had not forgotten the events in his past nor the words required to describe them. But he kept reminding himself that if the principal purpose of telling the story of his gambling life was the benefit he was to derive from repeating it, then it was self-serving of him to repeat it to Howie. There had to be another way he could achieve the same result. So you think I was a success in gambling? It was my brother who made me look like a success. He bailed me out, paid my fines, my bills, my court costs. It was Danny who got me jobs and who set me up in business. He was the success, not me. You're making up these things. And you've been trying to make me into something I never was. You're hoping to make the future fit your dreams about the past. You can do whatever you want with your past, but I can't let you change mine, even if I'm not proud of it. If I did, I'd be cheating myself and my family and a lot of people who believe in me, in spite of everything I've done. Why are you playing this game with me, Neddie? I know the good times we had, the money we won. You're the best gambler I've ever known. You understand sports and you're good at making odds, figuring points. You were always calm and slick and you never cheated. I was always proud of you for that. You know how to win like a gentleman. Do you remember me losing? Howie laughed triumphantly. Not often, Neddie. You were too smart for it. As smart as when I gave you $4,000 to bet on those Clydesdales. You never had a good eye for a horse, Neddie. Did you come with me many times when I took cash to pay bookies and street sharks? Like you said, only now and then. Howie's graciousness made Abner even more determined to destroy his idyllic picture of the past, and he reminded Howie of the times his brother-in-law had come to visit, and they had gone to the track every night for 3 weeks. Do you know how much I owed Sam for all of the side bets I made with him and the cash I borrowed? Howie acknowledged only the vaguest recollection. When he took my check to the bank, what happened? I think they said you couldn't cover it. But that happens to everybody, Neddie. It didn't mean you were going to stiff him. I might have if he hadn't been your brother-in-law. Do you remember how I made it good? Howie rubbed his teeth with the side of his finger. You left the cash with Danny. I picked it up at his office. That wasn't my money. It was his money, Danny's money. He loaned it, gave it to me. Do you know I borrowed from him until I was 43 years old? But he's your brother. You'd do the same for him. Why are you making up these stories? You think I'm inventing my past. If there's nothing beautiful in what I'm telling you, why would I invent it? I don't know, Neddie. You got a good wife and kids and a kind brother. You always had clothes and plenty of money. Look at your suit. You ain't no loser. I got thrown out of the YMCA last week for not paying my rent. But you got style, Neddie. That's what makes you a successful gambler. He was not a successful gambler, Abner answered loudly and leaned forward across the table, wanting to cram the words into Howie's head. He had never been successful at gambling, and he did not want to be successful at it now. I haven't touched a deck of cards or placed a bet in 4 years. You talk like somebody I don't know. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Abner agreed. I'm not the same person you knew. Could you believe I've passed this casino a half-dozen times every day since I've been here, and I never went inside? Even this morning, when I was trying to find somebody who knew where you lived. I stood by the entrance waiting for somebody to come out so I could ask about you. I could hear all the action and even see some of it, but I stayed outside in the lobby. Can you imagine me doing that in the old days? It wasn't so much boastful as it was satisfaction, proof to Abner that he had been able to control himself in such a dangerous environment. But Howie only snickered, curled his lips, and remarked that it didn't take any effort to leave the casino without betting. He'd done it hundreds of times when he was broke. He often went to the casino when he had no money, hoping to find someone from whom he could cadge a small loan. If he didn't see anyone he knew, he'd stroll around the tables and watch the action while looking for chips which had been dropped on the floor. He would bet whatever he could borrow or whatever was the value of the chips he found. And I always felt better for having chanced it, even when I lost and was forced to walk out without a nickel in my pockets. Abner had heard it all before. It was the credo of the quintessential romantic, someone who believed it was more honorable and courageous to gamble on the unknown, even if one chose incorrectly, than it was to find ways to solve even the smallest problem through an understanding of predictable events. But before Abner could respond, there was a knock on the door and he flinched, fearing it was his family. But the voice announced it was the valet service. Abner tipped the porter and hung Howie's suit over the closet door. It was still ugly, but it was pressed, and the lapels had been spot-cleaned. Even his shoes had been shined to a surprising brilliance. Howie examined the suit and seemed pleased. He picked up the clothes which Abner was lending him and carried them to the bathroom, then came back for his suit and shoes. They were late, and at any minute Abner expected to hear his family at the door. He had failed to influence Howie, and the time left for them to talk was rapidly vanishing. Impulsively, from his own sense of failure and desperation, Abner told him to wait before he dressed, and in a voice which surprised him by its sincerity, he asked if he remembered how much they had won on their trip to Las Vegas with Howie's brother-in-law. Abner knew he could hold Howie's attention with any gambling story, true or imaginary, and, in fact, Howie stopped, suit and shoes in hand, and waited for him. We pooled our money and divided it before we left the motel for the casinos. You didn't forget that, did you? Howie nodded slowly, the full recollection of that adventure, apparently only now beginning to enter his mind. Oh, I remember as if it was yesterday, because if it hadn't been for what I won, I wouldn't have been able to visit my uncle in San Diego. That's right, but how much did I win? Nothing. You played blackjack, I think, but I know you tapped out. So did Sam. Why are you asking me about that? Because I had to lie to Phyllis why I was taking a trip. I told her I was going to St. Louis for a job interview, and she even borrowed the money for my plane ticket. That part was true. So how could I forget winning more than $15,000? Where? On that trip to Vegas? Nah. Howie giggled a little and then frowned. You got it all mixed up. You lost, Neddie, just like Sam. I was the only winner. How do you know? Because you had no cash left, no chips. I know because you told me so. Well, I didn't tell you the truth. Abner tried to confess, his voice sinking with his self-esteem. I won $15,000, but I needed every cent of it. I'd been lying about my job, how much money I was making, and I got trapped. Everything came at me at once. I had to prove good faith. I had to come up with cash for Phyllis, the bank, 2 Shylocks, and a marshal, who had at least 4 judgments against me. That's why I went to Vegas with you. If I hadn't won, I might not have gone home. But you're saying you lied to me, Neddie. You never did that to anybody. Howie shook his head in disbelief. That's how it is for people like me. At least that's how it was. When you owe enough, you get desperate enough, you know that. Abner sat down and looked away from Howie's bewildered gaze. So the way I figure it, I owe you a third of 15,000. If you keep the 4 grand you owe me, then I'll owe you just 1,000. Seems practical to me. Howie didn't answer. He stood transfixed in the hallway like a traveler who had just discovered he was on the wrong train, headed in the wrong direction, unable to salvage the time or the price of the ticket, let alone the power to turn the train around. For a moment, consternation, even panic, seemed to overwhelm him. He leaned against the wall as though to steady himself. But then he suddenly squinted at Abner in his strange manner, and waved his shoes at him as if he was patting him on the back and reprimanding him at the same time. I know what you're trying to do, Neddie. You're trying to keep me from paying you what I owe you. You're even trying to make it seem like you owe me money. That's what Danny would do. He walked to the bathroom, hung his suit on the door, and came out still holding his shoes. I ain't so dumb so as not to understand you're trying to get me to quit gambling like you done. He waved the shoes again. And I'll tell you a secret I wouldn't admit even to Danny. It isn't much fun anymore. But I can't quit, Neddie. I'm by myself. I haven't got a family. I mean a real family with kids like you got. Going to the track or to the casino and playing cards is like being with my family. I need that even more than the money or the action. He walked up to the bathroom but paused and looked back at Abner admonishingly. Don't ask me to give it all up, Neddie. I can't. The door closed and Abner was left to consider how ridiculous he had been to try and rescue Howie. Rescue him from what? From the little happiness he found in his miserable existence? He thought back on his own life and the miserable existence from which he had been rescued by strangers who had introduced him to the fellowship. They had owed him nothing, and yet they had saved his life. He recalled the suffering of that year. Recovery was so painful when it was real, even for those who had helped him, that for several years it had been difficult for him to understand why they had not given up on him. When he had admitted to gambling after he joined the fellowship, but they had never threatened to let him sink. Always someone had been there to help pull him out. Didn't he owe it to Howie not to give up on him? But what did he have to offer Howie besides money? Suddenly, he thought he understood what it was all about, and he ran to the closet, ripped off his clothes and put on his shorts, pullover, sweat socks, and tennis shoes. He was tying his shoelaces when Howie came out of the bathroom, wearing his old shirt with the frayed collar and his ugly green tie. He carried Abner's clothes back to the table near the couch and put them down side by side, as if they were medals of honor. The tie first, then the shirt, the underwear, and lastly, the socks. It's a nice shirt, Howie volunteered and gently brushed his fingers against the fabric. But it wouldn't fit me, he said with forgiving grace. Howie hadn't looked up at him until this moment, but Abner could see that he was as surprised to notice his change of clothing as he had been to see what Howie was wearing. Why had he changed his clothes? Howie asked. Aren't we going downstairs to... I'm going to play tennis. Abner lied and picked up his wife's racket. There's no point to your seeing Phyllis and the kids. You told me you didn't have a family and said it was the casino that was important to you. But I didn't mean your family, Neddie. I want to see them. I've missed them. You missed my family? What do you need a family for? What's the purpose of a family anyway? You think you got all the answers. A family is people who care about you, who love you. Howie volunteered. You couldn't be a member of a family, Abner sneered. Yes, I could, Howie challenged. You're too selfish to be a part of a family. Even Eleanor left you because you only thought about yourself. What are you going to contribute to a family? What have you got to give? Poker chips? An old deck of cards? Pari-mutuel slips? You don't have to be rich to have a family, Howie argued. Even if I haven't got a lot of money, I can give other things. Like what? Cheating, lying, spending every penny on yourself, taking your family's money, destroying their financial security and their faith and trust in you? Family? Ha! You don't know anything about being part of a family. Yes, I do know, Howie squealed. I've watched you and Phyllis. I was your babysitter. I gave up gambling lots of times to stay with David and Molly. David and Molly. They thought you were dead. It's better for them if they don't know how far down you've gone. You actually compared my family to the swill you've been hanging around with. Deadbeats, pimps, card sharks, dildocks, and bunkos. That's a family? That's not fair, Neddie, Howie cringed. I don't think I should let you see my family. What do you want with them anyway? They don't have much money. Please, Howie gasped. Are you going to try to bribe them with your $7,500? No, I don't think you understand what a family is. You might try to ruin mine. Neddie, what are you saying? I love them. I wouldn't do anything to hurt them. It isn't fair of you to talk like this. I'm going to call Danny and ask him. Abner recoiled at the sound of his brother's name. It was the last name he would have thought to hear mentioned in this conversation. But of course, Howie knew nothing of Danny's death. So maybe it was only logical that he would seek help from that same person, upon whom Abner had depended for so many years. Danny, you want to call Danny? Abner repeated the name, and suddenly it sounded strange and remote, like a foreign name for which he could not determine the nationality or even the gender. And that's another thing. Stop talking about my brother. You can't call him, you poor fool. And why not? I don't have to charge it to your room. I got enough money of my own. I'm going downstairs and place a call by myself. Danny'll understand. He'll make you let me see David and Molly. Danny's dead. Abner sat down. Don't tell me another lie, Abner. But something in Abner's expression, or the tone of his voice, or the way he had changed his posture caused Howie to wobble on his warped shoes, and he sat down facing Abner but not looking at him. You are making it up. It's a lie just to scare me. It hurt Abner to see the change which was taking place in Howie's face, and yet he felt vindicated by the change. Wasn't this what he had wanted? Danny couldn't be. He couldn't. Howie mumbled in disbelief. He told me, and he felt amongst his pockets and took out a faded personal card and smoothed it with his fingers. That's his writing. His own writing. It's the only thing I owned I managed to save in Caracas. Danny had told Howie to call him at any time if he were in trouble. But Howie had resisted, in spite of the times he had needed help. He had been content to keep that card in his pocket like a talisman, believing in its power if he should ever want it. This card's been my ace. I thought that as long as I had it, I had something special I could always count on. Howie held up the card and turned it over several times. It was like having my own family, my own little family. He smoothed the card carefully and put it in his breast pocket. What am I going to do now? Abner saw at last what pain, humiliation, and love could do. So Danny was more than just luck or money to you? Howie nodded. He was someone we both could count on, and that's what a family's for. But he's gone. I haven't got a real family anymore, Neddie. The hell you don't. You got two of them. Come on, put on my shirt. We're going downstairs to see Phyllis and the kids, and then we're going on a picnic, and I'll tell you about the other one.